All right, well, we already have talked about how I got specialized training from Jim Cadigan when I was an apprentice in the document section of the FBI lab, and how he gave me specialized training in rubber stamps. And while the use of rubber stamps isn't common in the United States, I had the advantage of working in Latin America for 20 years, and they use rubber stamps all the time. You go into the average hardware store and buy a little item, you're liable to have 4 or 5 rubber stamps on your receipt when you leave. And so over those years, I had a lot of exposure to rubber stamps, and I began seeking them out, like going down the center of Bogota, looking for the guys sitting on little stools, hand carving rubber stamps, and I would buy some just so I would have a sample. So in 1997, I started thinking about writing a book about rubber stamp examination. Rubber stamp examination, a guide for forensic document examiners. And it was kind of easy for me. I just started writing down all the things I had been thinking about rubber stamps. And it ended up being how many pages? Over 80 pages, covering a wide variety of things. I designed the cover to make it look like somebody had stamped the words rubber stamp examination with a rubber stamp on the cover, putting it slightly askew and including some extra printing, which is typical of a rubber stamp, under inked, something in the way. That was my design. So the process, I don't really remember. It was 97, so that's 27 years ago. I don't remember a lot of the details, except that it seemed to go pretty easy for me. And my style of writing is to be very, very clear and simple.
Mm-hmm.
No technological words, or no things that can have double meanings. I try to be as simple as possible. And I started collecting impressions that I could use in my book, and to the point of even making some. Like in this page 10 here is one image where there's a rubber stamp, a staple over the paper that leaves a blank spot where the rubber stamp could print, and then a staple under the paper. But I made the impression that it showed that there was a bump there.
Right.
And it was fun inventing things to put in the book. Chapter 2, History and Manufacture, including a hand-carved rubber stamp. I'm not sure why I got training in rubber stamps from Jim Cadigan, except that once in a while we needed to counterfeit a stamp, to put on a document that might pass. And so he had a little shop up there for making rubber stamps. But when was the last time you saw a rubber stamp in your life here in the United States?
In like a stationery store.
Yeah.
You know, some sort of decorative.
Well, there are across the United States craft shops that feature just rubber stamps, and the little old ladies who are hobbyists go in and buy different rubber stamps so they can make their...
What was your hope in putting this together? Like, what did you want to accomplish from doing it?
Well, I guess my thought was that forensic document examiners should know about rubber stamps or have access to information in case a case ever came up.
Mm-hmm.
That was my thinking, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Although I knew in the back of my brain that in the United States they weren't going to find many hand-carved rubber stamps. But little details that go into the examination, I included, like little dots or extra printing. And I just saw just now in the back a complete guide, what you should do first, what you should do second. If this is yes, then go here. If this is no, go there. And so that's quite obviously what my thinking was. And I envisioned not being able to sell more than 500 because that was about all there were of document examiners in the United States. I was very pleased and honored that a guy down in Argentina had a translator translate my book, and he published it in Spanish, promising me 50 copies of the Spanish edition, but I never got them. And the lady who did the translation never got paid. So he was looking for every penny he could make, I guess.
Right.
This was the only publication on rubber stamps that I could find under one cover. A lot of people had published on rubber stamps, so it was just like one aspect or another aspect. This tried to include all of that. Years later, another woman who was a forensic document examiner in the United States printed another book called Rubber Stamp Examination, a guide for forensic documents, exactly the same title. And she complained, or she said, the reason I'm publishing this is because there's been no previous publications in the area, completely overlooking my book, which was printed years earlier. And then in her book, she complained that I had made mistakes in my book. So she wanted to complain, but she didn't want to acknowledge. That was a strange. And what I thought was really interesting is that she copied many, many of the characteristics on my cover, on her cover, like the angled rubber stamp.
Did you ever think about contacting her?
No, I didn't like her at all, so I didn't want to contact her.
Did you know her ahead of time?
Oh yeah, yeah. I knew her through the conferences that we went to. So I knew that I wouldn't publish more than 500, so I think I only had 500 copies made, and I'm down to just the last few now.
How does that feel to know that you wrote a book that other people found useful?
Well, I don't know that they found it useful.
Okay.
I think it's a good publication, and if anybody has a rubber stamp case come up, I know that they'll seek out this reference because I'm going to tell them here and here what they should do, and precautions how to avoid making mistakes. For instance, if you have a sample of a known stamp that you want to compare with a question impression, it has to be the same paper because the different paper will give you different results on your rubber stamp exam.
That makes sense, yeah.
It's just a simple matter, but it's something you have to know about. And also in here, while I was writing this book, I invented a method for collecting samples. And I had never seen that before, so I know that was my invention. Here it is, Appendix C, the algorithm in abbreviated outline form for the examinations. 1, determine the type of process in making the question image. And if yes, go here, if no, go there. I think it's interesting that I formed my own publishing company, the Wide Line Publishing Company. This was in Colorado Springs in 1997. And I don't think Wide Light Publishing was an official publishing company, but when I came to California, I did register the name with the state, and I think it's still there because every once in a while I'll get an advertisement, Wide Light Publishing, would you like to do this? I'm happy with the book, but the second book was even a better work. During my years as a document examiner, the use of the computer and Photoshop became more and more popular, and document examiners over the years would publish papers that they would present at the conference meetings. And it was interesting to me that the paper presentation was always about the object being examined. How to use Photoshop to examine a check, or how to use Photoshop to examine impressions. And there were numerous papers, they're all listed in the back in bibliography. But what I did is I took the emphasis away from the thing being examined to the process of examinations. And the chapters here are restoring faded and fudgy, comparing and contrasting, removing obliterations, specialized use of the scanner, forgeries through digital imaging processing, color separation. So it's the process. And there's very little original work in this book, but what I did is I took all the papers and found what techniques they were using, and then maybe changed the technique slightly or improved on the technique. And I'm really happy the way this turned out. And as far as I know, no other publications have been made of the same type. Well, before Photoshop, there were no digital imaging techniques. Had photography, yes. And it was laborious because you had to develop the film and then see the results and then change your exposure. It was laborious. Let me read to you, or abbreviate or paraphrase some of on the first page. In 1984, the year I retired, digital imaging processing was only used by super secret high-tech military stuff. The FBI lab didn't use it at all. Then in 1986, John F. Callahan published an article in the Australian Journal of Forensic Science entitled Digital Imaging Processing and Emerging Technology. And that was the start of it. Somewhere in here it says, the field is changing so fast that this book will be obsolete before it's published. But I'm well out of touch now, but I don't think that this has been improved upon. And it was fun. I enjoyed doing it. Simple little things became so obvious. Techniques. Method 1, erasing background. And the same thing, I didn't expect to sell more than 500, so I only had 500 printed. And I just about sold out. I think there's a small box down in the basement that still has some new copies.
How would you find people to sell them books?
Well, when the book was first published, I went to a national conference and gave a talk. I've just published a book and described it in general terms. And then says, if anybody wants to buy one, I'm in the back of the room. And I sold about 80 or 100 right there that hour.
Okay. How'd that feel?
Pretty good, because I was making a lot of money. I did everything myself. I didn't hire editors or proofreaders or artists, or I did it all myself. And so my profit margin was was very good.
Uh-huh.
I think I estimated it cost me about $20 a piece, and I sold them for 50 or 60. And I saw one on Amazon, used book by Gary Herbertson, $175. I
Oh,
thought, wow. I don't know if he sold it, but it was made me feel good.
valuable.
Might be valuable. Oh, I thought that was clever. One of my students in Latin America made a caricature of me, so
Oh, wow.
I used that as
that's funny.
as my photo on.
Oh, that's good. It almost looks like one of those Easter Island
Oh
heads,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I mean?
the Aku head.
Yeah. Have you been inspired to think of other books that you might have written as well?
Well, I do have. It's not really a book. I developed after Jerry Richards' invention. I had developed a little kit for making examinations in the infrared range. I got the camera and the projector and the stand and the filters. And then I made this as a manual for the use of that equipment.
Uh-huh.
So I don't really count this much as a publication. And I didn't spend an awful lot of time on it.
But you invented the equipment?
No, Jerry Richards.
Oh.
Jerry Richards invented this. And I just copied his model.
Mm-hmm.
I went to him and I says, "Les, you and I manufacture these kits so we can sell them." And he said he wasn't interested, so I did it by myself. And only sold one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I enjoyed the process of honing down exactly what did you need to know to use it and how to use it and the theory behind it. I find myself enjoying a lot of this work.
Uh-huh. It shows. You're smiling a lot.
Original things in here aren't many, but there's one. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. I was teaching a class, I think it was in Belarus, but I'm not sure. It may have been Georgia. I was teaching a class of document examinations, and a detective walked in and says, "I understand you're doing document examinations. Can you tell if this old passport photo is this?" No, this was the passport photo. Young lady, and he said, "Here's a current photo, and we want to know if this lady is the same as this lady." And all my students says, "No, we can't do that. That's not." I said, "Well, wait a minute. Let's think about this." So right then in class with the students, we developed the technique. So what we did was we turned the recent photo half gray, and we turned. First we had to make them exactly the same size, and then we turned the passport photo half gray, and then we put the two half grays together, and whichever part of those together is dark
The features?
are identical. And so this is just the dark features. And you can almost see the whole face.
Yes.
It's her. The shape of the nose, mouth, eyes, ears, all the same.
And you did that all just in one class?
Just about an hour. Well, because the techniques were so common.
Right.
Turning something half gray, turning something half gray, superimpose something. It was just a natural.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's the first time it was ever done with photographs to identify a person.
Right.
Let's see what else. Anything else? The idea that I would focus on the technique and not the object being examined was the first step. That nobody's done this. Then categorizing all these papers use this technique. All of these papers use this technique. Just putting it all together ended up in being a book. It'd be interesting to go down in the basement and get that box and then re-advertise. In the United States, at least 20 years ago when I was still don't know, 10 years ago, maybe when I was still going to conferences, there were two groups of document examiners. One called themselves the legitimate group and called the other group the illegitimate group. And what it was is all of those document examiners who were trained by police or the FBI or by the old timers in the field consider themselves to be legitimate. Then there's a bunch of little old ladies, whether they're male or female, who got training from illegitimate schools, illegitimate sources, or questionable sources. And there's a big rivalry between the two. And I was severely criticized by the legitimate group for giving classes to what they considered to be the illegitimate group. And I can remember one guy called me and says, "You're doing a disservice to this thing." He says, "You shouldn't be training them." And I says, "For your information, that's exactly the same criticism I got when I trained you in Quantico." He says, "Oh, that's different." I said, "No, it's the same."
Why were you getting criticism for teaching?
Well, because they
somebody
didn't think that the lesser group should receive any training.
Right.
They wanted the field for themselves.
Okay.
They were stealing customers.
Ah, there you go.
But I only had one experience where I really thought that the difference might be true. Because I went to a national conference of the lesser group, and some guy in that group had just published what he called the national exam to prove you're a document examiner. And he gave us all a test. And in the test were some questions of words I'd never heard used before, like micro printing or something like that. I'm taking the exam and I don't even know what those words mean. And it turns out that they had a previous seminar where they were learned about micro printing. And if there were 70 or 80 people in the conference, I ended up in the top 3.
Wow.
And one of the top 3 was the guy who wrote the exam. So he didn't really count. And I thought, well, why am I so high in this testing? And it's because I knew more and they knew less.
Right. Right.
But it didn't stop me from wanting to help them and offer them assistance. Sold them my book.
There you go.
Forensic experts have to establish themselves at each trial. Are you an expert? The lawyer on your side presents you as an expert, and then you have to go through what they call voir dire to establish your credentials. And I guess I could say I authored this book, but others have said the technique I'm using in this examination is present in Herbertson's book.
You're a reputable reference.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you were younger, did you think that it would be fun to write a book? Was that one of your aspirations?
No, never thought about it. Actually, when I was really young in high school, I thought I might be mentally retarded. I did so poorly in school. And that somehow establishes in my mind the fact that public education doesn't select out the brightest.
If you thought that in high school, what inspired you to go to college? Or think that you should go to college?
Well, I think we've covered part of this already. When I went to boot camp in the Navy, the first thing they do is give you a series of tests. And after that series of tests on day 3 or whatever it was, they called me into the office and says, Gary, you've done so well on this. You're way up at the top. We're going to give you 5 more tests. And if you pass these 5 tests, we'll give you credit for college units and send you to pilot training. And I said, no, you got the wrong guy. That's not me. But I didn't pass all 5 tests. I passed 3 of the 5. But that was right then. I thought, maybe I'm not so limited. And the second thing that happened, when I got stationed on a submarine at Pearl Harbor, I fell in with a group of guys on that boat who liked to just sit around and talk about ideas and philosophy and science. And I just enjoyed that tremendously. And so during that time, I did get out. I got discharged a month early, so I could start school.
Oh, okay.
So I went to Costa Junior College, met Joan.
So it sounds like the Navy helped bolster your confidence in yourself.
It was life-changing. It was really life-changing. I mean, they put me in charge of boot camp. I had experience in the Sea Scouts rowing the whaleboat, so I became the coxswain of our company's whaleboat. We raced every Saturday. Mm-hmm. And I thought, gee, I'm in charge of these guys.
Right.
Is this me? And then the story about being captain of the head. This is already on record, so I don't have to go over it anymore. But I was the youngest guy in the boat, and the chief of the boat put me in charge of the next 2 guys who came aboard. Yeah, so the Navy really was good for me. Mm-hmm. Really, really was good for me. Yeah, I intended to write a book about camouflage, but somehow it didn't get to it. I think in the end I didn't feel I had enough weight or enough subject matter to justify a book. I had a couple of good ideas, I thought, but and I started collecting material that could have been used in a book. But in the end, I decided the book was too thin. Well, I remember one day jogging at Quantico when I was an instructor at the FBI Academy, and a company of Marines was marching down the road, and they were all dressed in camouflage. But they were all in the same uniform. So this company of Marines became like a big caterpillar walking down the road. They were all the same. And there's a theory in camouflage that you don't want them all to be the same. You want to break it up. And so I thought right then, well, a third of those guys should be dressed in that, but a third should be dressed in a different contrasting uniform, and a third should be in a third uniform. And put these 3 together so it breaks it up. And that was the beginning, I think, right then, of my well, no, I knew about camouflage before then because I knew that it should have been broken up. I don't know why I was interested in camouflage, but it was interesting to me. But my main premise was that the military camouflage uses little teeny patterns all over. Mm-hmm. And that's great if you're 10 feet away or 5 feet away. But if you're 100 feet away, those little individual dots are invisible. It's just a green uniform. It's like if I hold up a newspaper and you're 10 feet away, you can't see the letters. And there's evidence in nature that the pattern should fit the circumstances of the animal. For instance, a nesting bird sits on the nest, hunkers down, and wants to blend in so that it's not outstanding. But a big giant snake, if it's the kind that coils up, it wants patterns that are all different. So when you see the glob, it just looks like a pack of leaves. That's a blending in of a different kind. And large predators have great big patterns. And if it's a stalking large predator, that pattern is the same color and maybe shape as the background. But if it's a large predator that has to fit in different circumstances, like a leopard, he's up in the tree, he's down on the ground, he wants a different style. He doesn't want to blend in, he wants to break up so that you see it, but you don't recognize for what it is. And so my contention is that the military shouldn't have those things. They should have great, big, bold patterns, like the generalized large predator. And in present day military uniforms, the colors are similar, light green and dark green, or light brown and dark brown. Hunters like camouflage that mimics leaves or bark, but it's little teeny patterns in more or less matching colors. The large predators have distinctly contrasted, maybe black and white and brown and green. And so my military uniform has large patterns with very contrasted colors. If you see a military tank that's painted in camouflage colors, it's not little teeny colors.
Right,
That's
big
great,
blotches.
big blotches. And I think that should go to soldiers' uniforms. And another thing I think is extremely funny, this is hilarious, is that the Navy has put their sailors in camouflage uniforms of little teeny patterns, but blue and black. And I think, wait a minute, who is ever going to see a sailor?
Right.
You know, they shoot ships from 20 miles away now. What color the sailors are wearing doesn't matter much. And I guess I kind of like having new ideas that nobody's ever had before. I like to think that I was the first thinking this thought. Along those lines, I made an invention. I used to be in the American Association of Blood Splatter Analysts. I went to conferences and thought a lot about it. And when I first became interested in that, I taught myself. I got all the literature and read it and experimented and dripped and splattered and had fun doing it. And I finally said, well, I've got to test myself. So I signed up for an advanced seminar at one of the conferences, paid my money and went to the seminar, and discovered that I knew more about it than the person who was putting on the workshop. I thought, well, that's not good. She should know a lot more than me, but she demonstrated several areas of incompetence. But along those lines, I made an invention for the blood splatter analyst. And I've just thought about it last week. I thought I ought to publish that. And what it is right now you can determine the angle the blood came when it hit the surface and made the splash mark. But the way they do it is you get a ruler and you measure the width and you measure the length, and then you do a little geometric manipulation and it gives you the angle. And the margin of error is large because you're measuring something very small. So what my invention is, on clear plastic, I've got, what's the word? Not oval. Can't think of the word right now. Well, let's use the word oval. I've got ovals, narrow and long, but a whole series of them, different sizes, but the same angle. And then another one, different angle, narrow and wide examples. And what you do is you just put the plastic over the blood stain and just keep changing until you get the match. And it gives you very precisely the angle.
That's inventive.
Yeah, it's not been done. It's still not being done. So I could have 200 printed up. Maybe I should do that. This might be incentive to do it. I've still got Photoshop on my computer. No, I've got other things I've got to finish first. Well, the biggest project of my life, you shared with me the 5 or 6 years we spent building the gaff-headed cutter named Lady Joan. That was a good project. It brought the father and son together. And we were just talking about it this morning. I can't believe we did that. It looks like too big a project to be simply built. But we built it. And it must have happened on other times, because the dedication in this book is to Ross. Isn't it nice when father and son can learn from each other and enjoy the process and find joy in the process? So we were working on some other project at that time. I think projects are a necessary part of my life. If I don't have 2 or 3 projects to work on, I get antsy. I get to feel like life isn't full. And maybe that's the secret to getting old. Keep busy. Keep your brain going. Keep thinking.